And first, I want to say that as a coach who works on clarity with women in these kind of situations, there are two different paths. And I want to speak to that first one that you talked about, women who don't leave because my kids are still young and I can't imagine them being given unsupervised parenting time because that would be worse. So when we have women dealing with these kind of situations, the goal is either to help them leave well or to help them stay well. And seeking safety on either end of that spectrum is the underlying goal. And each woman has to decide for herself whether at this point and at this time, her goal is to stay well, or if she's ready to leave well. And that's a very personal decision. But I do not believe that just leave is the one tool in the toolbox.
A lot of factors, a lot of different factors.
Yes. And only the person who has to live with the consequences of the decision has the right to make that decision. So I do want to honor the sacrifice of women who decide that their best option for this season is to stay in a terrible situation because they are truly laying down their lives for their kids. And I do not say that lightly. I'm not saying that that is a better approach, because I don't think there is one that is better and one that is bad. It is entirely individual. So I'm not saying, well, those women, they're really laying down their lives like Jesus did. But the women who leave, well, no, they are also laying down their lives in a totally different way. They are sacrificing sanity and stability and income and health and sleepless nights and terror in the court system and food stamps and staying in a shelter and all of these things, whatever it is that is the components of their story, to start life fresh. And both of those are equally sacrificial when they are entered into with thoughtfulness and courage and intentionality for the best of their children. And when they are chosen with attunement to what is the safest option for your particular story. So definitely want to honor those who can't just leave right now. It's a very special sacrifice to make. As far as the belief systems, I came from a denominational organization that traditionally does not support divorce for abuse. In the last few years, they have begun to broaden that stance a bit and update that. But growing up, I was taught that you just don't divorce. You say I do. It is forever till death do us part. And somehow, mistakenly and unbiblically, mixed in that was even if it's your spouse that's killing you. Like somehow there's a commandment that says thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not lie and thou shalt not steal. But if you're married to the person doing all of those things, it's okay for them to be the worse in for better or worse and the death until death do us part. And I don't think anybody actually said those things to me overtly. I just kind of caught it by osmosis. And I no longer believe that that is the heart of God toward men or women who are living in risk and danger. I see God himself divorcing Israel when Israel was faithless. I see God taking action to respect the autonomy of those who choose evil and sin and its consequences, even if it hurts him, but he separates himself from those who choose evil and sin. So, that being said, as I began reevaluating the things that I had personally just taken in and taken for granted and assumed to be true without really studying much more. I started studying deeply. The book Life Saving Divorce by Gretchen Baskerville is a really great one. David Instone Brewer's work on remarriage after divorce and the difference between divorce and putting away, and how God was actually talking about how much he hates abuse in Micah when he was Malachi. Sorry, Malachi.
The famous Malachi 2:16.
Yes, it's Malachi 2:16. I was like, wait a second. This is not. That's what it was. I was also thinking to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly, and that's Micah 6:8. I was getting those two mixed up in my mind. So yeah, Malachi 2:16, where the pretext for that is that God hates abuse and he hates the actions that cause violence. I learned so much. And I actually have a free YouTube video that has a ton of the Bible study and a workshop on how to know when it's bad enough to biblically divorce, like how to know when enough is enough. Because I realized if I was struggling with this so much and I was getting questions about it, other women were really struggling with how to know what to believe and when it's okay to prioritize safety. When is it bad enough to look for safety? I am a firm believer that we answer only to God. When Peter in Acts said that we ought to obey God rather than men, and so many examples of Jesus obeying the Father rather than the religious leaders who were corrupt, of others who were applauded for standing up to the corrupt religious rulers of the day, and they were affirmed and celebrated in Scripture for following God and obeying God's commands. I believe that when we talk about being called to living with the fruit of the Spirit, that's obeying God's command. And when God talks about hating relationships that include violence, then he's talking about where his heart is for those who are suffering violence in relationships. So when it comes to risking the loss of church community, it's not a lightweight decision to make. Nobody can make that for you, just like nobody can tell you to leave or tell you to stay. But I truly believe, based on my study over the years, that we are responsible to God for living in honesty, integrity, love, and safety, and for providing those things for our children to the best of our ability. And we don't need the permission of a pastor or a bishop or a priest or an elder to make decisions that God has already said are good decisions to make. So if your pastor or your church leader is telling you you have to have their approval before you are allowed to seek safety, they are effectively placing themselves in the position of Christ. And they're putting you on the cross as the sacrificial offering for the freedom of the other person to sin, while they take the role of God and tell you what you can and can't do with your own conscience. And you are not Jesus to be crucified on the cross to atone for other people's evil and sins. And your religious leaders are not in the role of God, where they do not have the power to tell you what you can and cannot do. God gave you autonomy, and God gave you an equal amount of intuition and intelligence and faith as anyone else. And you have the right to use those things. So there's my soapbox speech on that.
That was pretty powerful because we were talking.
Garnering hate mail for you, Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. I don't have enough mail to go through. Thank you for that. But I think it's very powerful because, I believe it's Leslie Vernick that says, while we're pro-marriage, we can also make marriage an idol. And sometimes in the Christian church, do anything to save the marriage. And we're not talking about the people in it. Like, what does each person need to do to be transformed, to be their healthy, fruit-filled self, to be a God-honoring spouse and have a God-honoring marriage. But so many times I've heard so many stories of pastors or elders really manipulating the woman to stay. Things like, well, if you divorce, the divorce rate is 50-50. The church should be doing better than that.
Instead then they should address the abuse epidemic.
Exactly. But,
don't make it where women have to die to stay married.
Exactly. We need our numbers better, Sarah. Come on.
I agree with them. I agree with them wholeheartedly. The church should be doing better. The church should be a place where marriages are not synonymous with assault, rape, and near death.
Yeah. And I think a little bit of a soapbox that in some situations, some churches have become so much like an organization. If I go to confront the man on his behavior, he is the one who will decide if he's staying or leaving the church, and I might lose a church member over it. I mean, I have talked with pastors
the tithe payer, and if the guy is if the abusive husband is the employed member, then he's also the one who would take his tithe and offerings with him elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so then the financial hit to the church, it's like they want to keep the consumers and the constituents happy. So if we lose the unemployed wife and the children who aren't old enough to have jobs and be paying into the church coffers yet, whatever.
Yeah, there's actually been conversations that has come up, that we have to be careful how, or the next one is, well, we want to minister to both of them. And I said, well, you can minister both of them. She and the children can stay, and you can one-on-one do some work with him outside of the church, but both of them attending church. There's one situation where the woman did have a restraining order, and this person was violent, had a gun, had threatened to kill his wife, which is, I was working with a child. We had to call CPS because she's like, oh, by the way, my dad told me today he plans on killing my mom, and there's a gun in his car. And I was like, whoa, wait, we've got to do something right now. And this was like a church situation. And they got the restraining order, and two of the board members were like, but we have to pastor him too. We have to be
good. Start a prison ministry.
I like that. But they actually convinced her to drop this restraining order. Okay, well, they didn't understand. I kept telling them, if he is allowed to come on this church property while she is here, that will null and void her restraining order. I do not believe he wants to come to church to be with his family. I believe he wants to come to church to null and void this restraining order, which they wore her down. He started coming to church, so they could be together with family, which of course he was able to go to court and then have the restraining order tossed out. And then did he ever come back to church again after the restraining order was thrown out? No, he did not. But that was his, I want to change, I want to be better. And these two elders were like, we have to equally minister. And I was like, there are a lot of different ways. We actually have two services. He could come to one, she could come to the other. There could be security to make sure they don't interfere. You could work with them one-on-one, take them out to coffee. But that equal. So I want to go into this like codependent model, co-addict model, because there's Stephanie, this is what the one elder said to me, Stephanie, it's 50-50. Both people brought equal things into the marriage. And so we have to look at the marriage as 50-50 of a problem. Because we have to consider what she brought for her to be abused.
I have big feelings about this topic.
Oh yeah, I had big feelings that day. It took me a long time to work through my own
to re-regulate. Yeah. So just from a scientific perspective, the co-addict codependent model has been debunked by much more recent research. And if you read one of the founders of AppSats is Dr. Barbara Steffens. And when I was doing AppSats training, I did not finish the certification, but I did the training. So when I was doing AppSats training, and interacting with Dr. Steffens and the other trainers there, I chose to do that because the first book that opened my eyes was Dr. Steffens' book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse. I don't know if you've read that book, but I had been receiving some counselors' input in the very early days of life blowing up. And I'd also gotten the church leaders trying to wear me down. But let me stick with one story at a time. So a friend of mine handed me like a Walmart bag, little grocery store plastic bag, and inside was a book with brown paper bag taped around the cover. And she said, ignore the title, read the book when you're ready. And it was Dr. Barbara Steffens and Marsha Means' book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, and the founders of AppSats. And in the book, well, first of all, the book put me in bed. Reading that book was like hooking onto a fire hose and downloading, at the time, 12 years of incredible sexual and psychological and domestic trauma. I could relate to something, some piece of every single case study. Not the whole thing, but there was some aspect that I resonated with from every single case study. And it blew my mind because all of these things that I had become numb to, that I had felt were not right, but I couldn't put words to it because I didn't have the language for this. And I didn't have the infrastructure to be able to know where each of these types of things plug into this overall abusive system. My back seized up, my legs seized up. I could hardly walk. I kept putting down the book and going and taking hot baths to try to loosen up my hips and my lower back. I was lying down on the wood floor, trying to find pressure points to release this stuff. I couldn't lie down comfortably. I couldn't sit comfortably. I couldn't stand comfortably. I ended up having to get massage and physical therapy to try to release all of this stuff because it just all the trauma stored in my body just seized up. And I had been being told that I was codependent, that I was addicted to the addict, that I was just trying to control him. And I kept telling them, okay, tell me how this is partly my fault when he was doing this for a decade before we even met. Did I retroactively have some kind of responsibility for this? Tell me how I can come into this a innocent homeschooled virgin of parents who've been together for decades, who is obsessively truthful, lies awake at night if I may possibly have misrepresented a detail on something, and is so loyal that I don't know when to just give up on things. Tell me how I'm causing this sexual addiction that predated me. And they were like, well, but you're just, women who end up marrying these kind of guys are just co-addicted and codependent. I was like, no, this does not scan for me. I remember reading one book. I don't remember what it was. I threw it at the wall. I was like, this is ridiculous. There is no way. So underneath it, I felt like this was not right, but I didn't have any scientific evidence for it. And I like scientific evidence. I like to know the evidence that underscores what does the data say? Well, the book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse, gave me that information. And Dr. Steffens had done 10,000 hours of research she was one of the first people who recognized that women going through this are actually responding on a trauma model and not a codependency model. Something fascinating that I discovered was that the whole SA, Sexaholics Anonymous, and S-Anon structure was actually borrowed from Al-Anon with zero research on sexual addiction or sexual compulsivity. So it is not, and this may get you more hate mail too, so you're welcome, but the whole 12-step and Sexaholics Anonymous, S-Anon, oh my goodness. All of that is borrowed from Alcoholics Anonymous, the AA and Al-Anon model. Zero research on the differences between having an outside substance that messes with your body on like a physical cellular level versus having an inside your brain thought pattern and a worldview of compulsive entitlement and giving yourself permission to exploit others. Those two are vastly different clinical situations. I am not a clinician, although I've trained with Dr. Minwalla and the Minwalla model for the deceptive sexual trauma, and I've trained with APSATs in order to just have this information to work with. But these are not the same thing. So telling women who are being abused that you share responsibility in your abuser's actions is simply not true. In scripture, even. So let me back up. The evidence and the data of research shows that the codependent, co-addicted model is out of date and insufficient and inaccurate. The trauma model is much more applicable. That being said, in the Bible, we have very clear gospel information that tells us that we are each responsible for our own decisions. No other person is responsible for my sin. I am not responsible for any other person's sin. Therefore, the concept of codependency doesn't measure up to the gospel, because I am only responsible for me, and I am responsible to God for me. My abuser is only responsible for his actions, and he is fully 100% responsible for his actions. I am not. Now, do we have influence on each other? Can we do things that terrify each other or that cause stress for each other? Sure. But I'm still responsible for how I respond to those things. And just to those who may be listening to this and thinking, well, wait a second, you mean I can't blame my abuser for when I did this thing in response that was actually really not a good thing? Like my abuser pushed me and pushed me and pushed me, and then I exploded and I reacted in a way that is actually, I'm embarrassed that I reacted that way. I'm not proud of it. So isn't that my abuser's fault? Well, your abuser is responsible for all the things they did to you. And you still have to take responsibility for the things that you have done. That doesn't mean that your response is not understandable. You may have responded to being pushed and pushed and pushed. You may have responded in a way that is entirely explainable and understandable. But that doesn't make it excusable. And if we are going to heal as women or men, if you're on the flip side of this, if we are going to heal after experiencing harm, we have to start by telling ourselves the truth. And we have to start telling the truth to ourselves about ourselves. And we have to insist that others do the same. We don't stand by for the lies that others are telling to minimize their own responsibility, because we can't change what they do. But I can take full responsibility for myself. A really good thing to think about for women in this kind of situation is that if you have gotten to the point in your marriage where the way the other person is acting or or the way that you interact with the other person seems to be turning you into someone you don't recognize, enough is enough now. If your interactions with your partner are making you, if you're recognizing, man, I'm becoming such an angry person. I'm explosive at like everything. I didn't used to be that way. That's not who I am. Or I used to be so sharp, and now I can barely keep two thoughts in my brain at the same time. I'm forgetful. I'm scattered. I'm in a brain fog all the time, and I just can't keep up. That's not who I used to be. That's not who I am. Then the psychological and emotional and verbal harm that you are enduring has become physical abuse because it is affecting your brain and your body tissues. It's affecting your nervous system to the point that you are dysregulated enough that you are no longer reflecting your true self that God created, the true woman that you can look in the mirror and respect. So if you find yourself at that point, it is time to reassess. What you choose to do with that reassessment is not my place to prescribe in a podcast episode, but it is time to take a hard look at the factors that are pushing you to this point.
Well, I kind of want to end us right there. I was going to ask you for a takeaway. And I think, when you come to a place, and that's so many of the women that I work with, they've lost themselves in the marriage to save the marriage. They have sacrificed themselves and who they are, and they have become maybe even verbally abusive themselves or emotionally reactive in a way that's not there. You mentioned before, I can leave well or I can stay well. Whatever my choice and my decision is, I still need to do it in a way that reflects Christ. That's,
Yes.
All else is between you and Jesus. But the other, how you make the decision, and then, but to stay well or go well, I think that's a great summary point. So I want to get people to you. Do you work across state lines? Are you working more as a coach or a counselor?
I am a coach, and we have coaching courses and community with Wild. So state lines and at times women in other countries who also find us. We have a big group in South Africa. We have a group in Australia. We have a group in the UK, some places in Western Europe. We have a group in Canada. So we have a lot of international women in our support groups. And a really great place to start is our monthly membership, which is called The Scoop. And it's where you get the scoop on everything. And it includes a monthly group coaching session as part of the membership for $9 a month. Like, it's also like basically taking one person out to ice cream. So for a scoop of ice cream, you had a group coaching session. And every 3 months, we have a free workshop that you don't have to pay for. It's people who aren't members get charged for the workshop. They can buy it, but you get it free. And we also have 24/7 community in our Marco Polo community. And it is open to women anywhere. So in addition to that, we have healing courses, trauma resolution workshops, community, and one-to-one coaching.
Okay. And would that be thewilderness2wild.com?
Yes, that is all at www.wilderness2wild, 3 words all together.
All right. And Sarah is also the author of He Chose Porn Over Me, Women Harmed by Men Who Use Porn, Myths We Believe, The Predators We Trust, and One Phase, Shed the Mask, Own Your Values, and Lead Wisely. Has there been additions to that since you've?
Yes, those are the 3 paperbacks that I have. And in addition to that, I have a number of ebooks that are available on our website at wilderness2wild.com. One is 6 Ways to Find a Divorce Attorney that will help you save your kids. I have one called Systems of Abuse, How to Recognize Red Flags of Toxic Relationships, Systems of Love and Honor, How to Recognize the Signs of Safe Relationships, and several others. So we have a number of resources there, some of them for digital download and others you can get paperback on Amazon.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest and being on the podcast today. I have learned a lot, and I hope there's some takeaways out there from all the different things. And you equally offended, so I should get emails from both genders, maybe. So thanks for that, Sarah.
Equal opportunity toe stepper here. So.
So check Sarah out at Wilderness to Wild, and listeners, and by the time this is being released, this is the fall. So hopefully, Uniquely Us, Gracefully Navigating the Maze of Neurodiverse Marriage, the first book on autism, marriage, and faith that is research-based. Also, personal stories should be out on through Amazon this fall. So keep a lookout for that. And we always want to remind you that there is hope for your future, and you're not alone on this journey.